Hey, it is 40 minutes past the hour. Welcome again, everybody, to CFPB's HMDA Tech Sprint Week. This is the publications track, and we have an exciting presentation from the Explorers. Take it away, Larice.
Thank you, Eric. First of all, thank you to the entire CFPB Tech Sprint team for including us in the Tech Sprint. So my name is Larice Brown. I'm a senior economist at Freddie Mac. My partner in crime on this is Jay Davey. He's a member of my team. I just want to remind everyone, Freddie Mac is a purchaser of mortgages in the secondary market, chartered by Congress to provide affordability, liquidity, and stability in the mortgage market. We use HMDA data to better understand the mortgage market, including how low to moderate income borrowers are served as we look to meet our affordable housing goals, duty to serve underserved markets, access to credit, and equitable housing efforts. So the motivation for this exercise, which is about releasing credit score data, whether we can balance the privacy and transparency piece around that, is truly around the purpose of HMDA. So straight from the CFPB website, everyone here probably is very familiar with the purpose of HMDA being to understand how the housing needs of communities are being served, trying to shed light on whether there may be patterns of discrimination out there, and give public officials and others information that may help them make decisions. Of course, the data is public, and sometimes it's modified to protect applicant and borrower privacy. There are some limitations to this privacy trade-off that we have to face. For instance, when we look at what are the reasons for the observed mortgage market differences that we observe, are the differences that we observe due to discrimination or other factors that we aren't able to observe if we're only using public HMDA data? What's the potential impact of a policy proposal? How do housing outcomes vary over time? A lot of this stuff is very much embedded in our ability to observe as much transparent data as possible in order to answer these kinds of questions. I should point out, we've seen a lot of fabulous presentations with a lot of maps and API applications and so forth. We have in-house data scientists, economists, and other researchers who can retrieve and manipulate data. So the other motivation for this particular topic for me was a little selfish in saying, what can we possibly gain from an additional CFPB effort that will benefit the public as well as Freddie Mac users? So, kind of a broader thing. One other thing, I have an example here. The Urban Institute did a research paper where they were looking at differences in outcomes that may be differences in Black-white homeownership rate by metro area. And we provided them some data where we gave them the median credit scores by metro area in order to help facilitate their analysis. And we found that there was a lot of variation in those credit scores. You could extend analysis if you had information from the HMDA data, because it would allow you to look at the relationship between the mortgage market and those observed differences in things like the homeownership rate gap between Black and white consumers, for instance. Two things that I want to look at quickly here. One is the possibility of doing loan level credit score ranges. In other words, disclosing credit score information at the loan level. The bins or categories could be made wide enough to mask the actual credit score associated with a particular consumer while providing useful information to data users. You could also consider combining the information about the applicant or the co-applicant using minimums, averages, or some other kind of combination before binning. And by the way, binning is consistent with how the debt to income ratios are currently disclosed. This is just an example of a set of categories with very wide ranges that you could potentially use if you wanted to go the loan level disclosure route. I'll spend a little bit more time instead on the aggregate credit score data disclosure option instead. Here we actually have a good example, a good start in a couple of publications that the CFPB has actually released, where the credit score information, medians, means, and some distributions are already provided in the publication. I recommend that we actually recommend that you look at including maps and chart creation options as a tool from prepared aggregate data on the website. In addition to the data point options, you can include a geography selection. As I mentioned with the Urban Institute analysis, having that geography piece turned out to be very important and interesting. You could also potentially include denials or application data as opposed to just origination data, which is currently in the data point publications. Where could this live? This would be right there in the everyone's showing the spinoff on the HMDA website. You can have it spin off right there. You can have people select their geography where they would select national, state, MSA, or CBSA level geography. I put county out here as a potential option. And I'll get into why that may be a little bit more tricky to do county. And I'll acknowledge that. And furthermore, you can have filters. Everyone's shown this stuff is not that hard to build, these little tools where you have filters by application. Here I'm saying you can either select all applications or just originations and then have a number of filters that people may be interested in. But the real meat is that people are going to be particularly interested in receiving that data, that either national, state, or MSA level data broken out in first, I know this, by borrower race and ethnicity, age group, and neighborhood income would all be of interest to people. And these are the same categories that are currently used in the data point, the most recent data point that I mentioned on the prior slide. The total row could provide overall means for the filtered categories. You can have separate columns for applicant and co-applicant values, or you can find a way to combine the information into one. I don't know why my daughter is screaming down there. Means may be easier to manage in an aggregate data set with the count. I can allow selection variables as restrictions or crosstabs. You could use the enhanced loan type that the CFPB bulletin used. Final slide here. I think I'm going to hit 8 minutes in just a second here, so I'll turn a lot of time over. When I initially set out to do this, I realized that the part showing the maps and charts was actually the easy part. The hard part is the real innovation, the real analysis is figuring out how to do the privacy piece. That's where the tricky part comes into play. So that's actually where I spent most of my time this week with Jay. We did things like looked at synthetic, basically made synthetic credit score data, thank you, Eric, and tried to figure out, what would it look like to actually display this data, and along what dimensions could you get away with displaying this kind of data. We learned, figuring out the charts, figuring out the maps, that's going to be relatively easy for people to do in practice. So when we take a look at this, by the way, in terms of what techniques you ought to use to do this, the Census Bureau has basically recently come out with a far more complex method. I'm losing the name of it right now, but the Census Bureau has made the privacy protocol for the 2020 census more transparent, but also a little bit more complex because they are recognizing the potential for big data to come into play and make it easier to match these, public data sets up with things like proprietary or commercial data sets. I don't think that the HMDA data analysis needs to go quite that far because the number of observations are far fewer, and we're not talking about necessarily needing to go down to census blocks, census tracts, or anything like that. County might be too low for some instances. I think state and MSAs are quite feasible. And in fact, in our analysis, I find that the state level disclosure appears feasible for the owner-occupied purchase money for Hispanic, Black, and Asian borrowers in particular. So you wouldn't have to do much restriction there at all if you use a simple technique of looking for where you even have 10 observations, for instance, in a cell. There are some race ethnicity groups where your counts get low. This is less of an issue for age categories. This is less of an issue for the neighborhood income categories. But within the principal residence purchase market, we do see issues potentially for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, as well as within certain sub-markets if you continue to filter further. So I'll pause there and turn it over for questions. Thank you.